as the wind have changed. Clouds roll in from the north and it start to rain.
And it rained and rained and just continued on until August 1st.
River rolls all day, the river rolls all night.
As the sandbags started falling, the water was rolling in.
They're trying to wash us away.
I just can't believe the water can do all of this damage and make all this mess that it's made. It just doesn't seem possible.
They're trying to wash us away. They're trying to wash us away.
Welcome to this special presentation of News 4. I'm Chief Meteorologist Steve Templeton. 30 years ago today, the land you see behind me was underwater, a lot of water, as much of the St. Louis area was dealing with the historic flood of '93. And those who lived through it know it's something that needs to be remembered because it changed things around here forever. Tonight we'll break down one of the most devastating floods in U.S. history and celebrate the resilience of people like you who fought the flood and 30 years later are back stronger than before. You don't have to be a meteorologist to know the flood of '93 was monumental. To this day, it's the flood of record in St. Louis, and it's stretched on through the summer of '93. David Busey is with the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers in St. Louis, and in 1993, he was here fighting the flood.
And at that time, a lot of the experts were calling for that's impossible. There's no way it could get that high. But what they forgot was the '93 flood was not only high, but it was very long.
All this unfolded in St. Louis's sultry summer heat and humidity. And News 4 meteorologist Kent Earhart recaps the big events making up the flood of '93.
Here on Lenore K. Sullivan, the floodwaters covered the street. The Great Flood of '93 was quite literally a perfect storm of weather events, including record rain and even heavy snow.
In mid-April 1993, the Mississippi was creeping up Main Street in Grafton, but residents weren't worried.
When you live here in a town like this, you have to expect when you have a wet spring, you got a lot of water.
By now, St. Louis had received 13 inches of rain, 4 inches more than normal. By the end of April, state emergencies were declared in Grafton and parts of St. Charles County. But then the rain stopped and the cleanup began. But this time, the river was just playing possum. In late June, the rains returned. There was heavy flooding in Wisconsin and Minnesota. By June 25th, St. Charles County was underwater again. 2 days later, the river was back over Lenore K. Sullivan Drive on the St. Louis riverfront. The city's massive floodgates were going up. On July 6th, volunteers working in West Alton were told to give up.
The minute before we went on changed completely. All these folks here who have come out and have been trying to help, trying to make sure that they can help their fellow man, now being told that they're going to have to stop, that indeed there is nothing they can do.
The next day, West Alton was completely underwater. All across the Midwest, the river was defeating levees. Some experts say losing a levee to the flood of '93 was nothing to be ashamed of.
When the river gets higher than the top of the levee, it's overtopped. That doesn't mean the levee failed. That means the standard condition for which it was built was exceeded. And that's different than saying it failed.
By now, the flood was everywhere. This was no longer your ordinary flood.
This is an evacuation notice.
On July 12th, about 200 residents along the river to Pear were advised to get out. Power was cut to drive home the urgency.
This is a disaster that we're dealing with here. This is not a picnic.
Then more rain, and it just kept coming. On July 17th, President Clinton came to St. Louis to view the devastation and host a flood summit. Governors from 9 states attended. The flood was now a national disaster. On July 19th, more rain. The River to Pear levee suffered a major break. New evacuations were ordered for the area. The order to evacuate almost came too late for residents of Kaskaskia Island, south of St. Genevieve. The massive levee gave way on July 22nd. It was an awesome and terrifying sight. July 21st, The river reaches 43¼ feet at St. Louis, breaking the record set in 1973. Meanwhile, an eerie sight along the St. Louis riverfront, water bubbling through the city's giant floodgate. Engineers said it would hold, and it did. On July 23rd, the Mississippi forced its way under the concrete flood wall in North St. Louis. River water was blasting up on the other side. It took 111 cubic yards of concrete and 6,000 tons of rock to plug the leak. Leaking flood walls, smashed levees, and still more rain. It seemed things couldn't get any worse, but they would. The darkest day came on July 23rd. A group of students from St. Joseph's Home for Boys were on a field trip to Cliff Cave in South St. Louis County. Deep inside the cave, the group was trapped by flash flooding. Incredibly, cavers found one boy alive the next day.
Again, it was a 100-foot chunk of the levee that just blew out.
They said this would never happen, but on Saturday morning, July 31st, the Chesterfield Valley was under a dozen feet of water. The Monarch levee broke the night before, allowing the Missouri River to pour over the valley. And in South St. Louis, a new worry that dozens of huge propane tanks might break from their moorings.
Emergency. I understand the organization. I will lock the door, and this is it.
The city ordered residents within a half-mile of the site to evacuate. By August 1st, the rivers were tearing past and blowing through everything and anything in their way. In Alton, the Mississippi literally came blasting up through the streets.
There's lots of places where it boiled through the road, that coming up through there. The pavement's peeled up over on the Piasol side.
The town's water plant was now completely flooded. That same morning, a levee broke in Columbia, Illinois. Stunned viewers watched live television coverage as the river ripped away Virgil and Darlene Gumersheimer's home. In St. Louis, the river reached 49.58 feet, establishing the new and final record.
In 1993 at the crest on August 1st, it was 1,080,000 cubic feet per second. If you look at it in some ways, a basketball is about a cubic foot. So every second, over 1 million basketballs would have been passing here.
On August 16th, Highway 40 reopened in Chesterfield. On August 20th, water service returned to Alton. The flood was gone, but what a mess it left behind.
The flood of '93. For News 4, I'm Kent Earhart.
Coming up next, floodwaters forced them to move. Now the town sitting on a hill is teaching future generations how to deal with a natural disaster. For more on the flood of '93 and how it impacted the St. Louis area, check out our interactive coverage on the KMOV News app.
The Great Flood of '93, 30 years later, sponsored by John Beal Roofing.
The First Alert Weather Team is watching out for you in the city and beyond.
Watching out for you in St. Louis.
Watching out for you in the Metro East.
Watching out for you in Florissant.
Watching out for you, St. Charles.
Watching out for you
in Afton.
In Belleville.
In Ferguson.
Watching out for you, O'Fallon, Missouri.
From downtown to your town, be the first to know what's headed your way with the First Alert Weather Team.
First Alert Weather, watching out for you everywhere, every day.
This is the city we call home. Iconic, genuine, and full of heart. Here, we care about our neighbors. We value these connections because together we can take on whatever the world may bring.
Thank you.
We are bold, daring, human. We are all part of one family here. We are proud. We are St. Louis. We are News 4.
Watching out for you.
The flood of '93 changed the way many people think about living in a floodplain. And 30 miles south of St. Louis, Kristen Cornett shows how Valmeyer, Illinois has become an internationally known model for starting over on new ground.
I'm in Valmeyer, which now sits on a bluff 400 feet above Old Valmeyer. And the bold move to relocate is serving as a lesson for other communities around the world.
This was where our house was in '93. We loved our house. We raised our 3 kids here.
Dennis Knobloch raised his family in a home sitting here in the heart of what used to be the village of Valmeyer. But that was before the flood of '93. Disaster hit when the Fountain Levee broke on August 2nd.
I still had a little bit of hope yet that something was going to happen to keep it from getting to us and causing problems.
But the river poured in, swallowing streets, homes, and the school. 90% of the property was beyond repair. So local leaders made a bold decision to move the entire community to the top of the bluff bordering the town.
This was a 500-acre farm tract. It was a big old cornfield.
Right now, Knobloch is the chairman of the Monroe County Board of Commissioners, but 30 years ago, he was the mayor of Valmeyer. Knobloch oversaw a $7.2 million buyout, moving hundreds of homes and 3 churches to the top of the bluff.
Our population at the time of the flood was 900. We're over 1,200 people now, so we're growing. We have a healthy school system here in the community, a K through 12 school system. The kids get a good education here.
But moving their entire village isn't the only bold move residents made.
And now we're going to be going through quite a change here. We're going to go from daylight to darkness.
Knobloch is driving into what used to be a massive quarry. To build on the bluff above, the town had to buy the quarry below. Now, Valmeyer leases out the miles of caverns as warehouses, where the temperature is always the same, a cool 58 degrees.
For many years, this was where many of the residents of Valmeyer earned their livelihood as employees of the quarry company.
Just another creative way residents turned a catastrophe into something positive. But some aspects of old Valmeyer never recovered. The small businesses which thrived down below never came back.
We had a fantastic grocery store prior to the flood, and we miss having that here. It would be great to have a grocery store, but for the time being, we have a gas station and convenience store, and like every other small community in America, a Dollar General.
So if you're interested in opening a small business, Valmeyer will welcome you. And you too could become part of the flood recovery story known around the world.
I've just finished working with FEMA and NASA on an international process of helping communities that are in the process of trying to recover. There's no doubt that what we were able to pull off here was a pretty astounding feat.
Kristen Cornett, News 4.
Today, business is booming in the Chesterfield Valley, but 30 years ago, all of this was underwater. Thanks to some serious innovation, this city built back, bigger and better than before.
We're walking up on a 500-year engineered levee.
Michael Steinberg is one of the premier developers in St. Louis, but this levee may be his most important project to date. Here's why. On the night of August 31st, 1993, the Monarch Levee gave way and the Missouri River poured in. Overnight, the Chesterfield Valley morphed into a giant lake.
So everything in this entire area from the river all the way back up was 18 to 20 feet underwater.
The water is inching closer and closer and closer.
Of all the gut punches the flood of '93 threw, this may have been the most unexpected. But after viewing the devastation the next morning, Steinberg wasn't going anywhere.
You know, I wasn't in shock. I said to myself, there's an opportunity here, how to make lemons to lemonade.
Not everyone agreed. Ultimately, a third of businesses in the valley left, taking 1,500 jobs with them. Steinberg knew to bring them back, the valley needed a new levee, bigger, higher, wider, and stronger than anything ever seen in our area. And with the levee, 6 large pump stations and new drainage systems. Just a few years after the flood, new business poured into the new Chesterfield Commons and Boone's Crossing retail districts.
There was less than 2 million square feet of businesses in this area doing less than $30 million. Today, there's over 10 million square feet of national retailers that are doing over $1 billion.
And we're not just talking business.
As we sit up here today, look at the nice bike path. Look at the running path. This is what I said we need to do.
And as for Annie Guns, well, the business not only survived the flood, it's thriving. And that comes as no surprise to Michael Steinberg.
The future is unlimited here.
Matt Chambers, News 4.
Harnessing the power of community. News 4 goes back to a butcher shop still in business after battling the flood. Plus, it's some of the most iconic video coming out of the crisis. We revisit the farmhouse sent down the river when our special, The Great Flood of '93, returns.
The Great Flood of '93, 30 years later, sponsored by John Beal Roofing.
The First Alert Weather Team is watching out for you in the city and beyond.
Watching out for you in St. Louis.
Watching out for you in the Metro East.
Watching out for you in Florissant.
Watching out for you, St. Charles.
Watching out for you
In Afton.
In Belleville.
in Ferguson.
Watching out for you, O'Fallon, Missouri.
From downtown to your town, be the first to know what's headed your way with the First Alert Weather Team.
First Alert Weather, watching out for you everywhere, every day.
This is the city we call home. Iconic, genuine, and full of heart. Here, we care about our neighbors. We value these connections because together we can take on whatever the world may bring.
Thank you.
We are bold, daring, human. We are all part of one family here. We are proud. We are St. Louis. We are News 4.
Watching out for you.
In times of crisis, that's when we all come together. A great example of that, a Jefferson County family's fight against the rising waters and a rally of their community to help keep their business afloat.
How many would you like?
2, please.
2 of them? Coming right up.
Tom Kolish is the owner of John's Butcher Shop in Festus. It used to be his dad's shop, and it didn't used to be here.
The sandbags on the west side, the east side of the building, they were about 8 feet tall.
In 1993, it was on what is now a parking lot, not far from a stream that runs to the nearby Mississippi. The river was backed up into the channel and creeping up toward the shop. That's where we found Tom back then, working round the clock to keep the flood out of the store.
Supposed to get awful deep. They set up to the top of the soda machine. It's 45 where it's supposed to crest.
Like so many other business and homeowners, he could hardly believe the strangers who, like the floodwaters, kept coming to pitch in.
A lot of them people haven't met. People, they're great. They come out of nowhere just to help. There's some folks right over here. They've been out here every day, all day long.
And boy, did they need help.
Well, I had a brand new baby girl at home. She was about 3 months old. Didn't get to see her for 3 weeks. Night and day, we fought the flood. It was hot, sweaty, dirty. Couldn't wait for it to be over.
Soon, though, the battle was over. The river had won.
It was on an early, don't remember the day, but as the sandbags started falling, the water was rolling in, and it was, within minutes, there was 9 feet of water in the building.
The store was a total loss. But the business survives, now in a new, safer location.
We're up high, we're not going to get flooded.
Tom bought the store from his dad. He kept the old sign and this.
After you called, I remembered we still had one of these left. That's what we had during the flood. Anheuser-Busch would bring cases of it down, and this one somehow we still have.
A 30-year-old can of water. So would Tom drink it today?
No. I still think of the floodwater.
Whether it's Chesterfield Valley and St. Charles County turning into lakes or the Mississippi creeping up the arch steps, there are many enduring memories from the flood of '93. But here in Columbia, it was one couple's devastating loss that created the most enduring image from the disaster.
August 1st, Columbia, Illinois. The Mississippi broke through the levee, sweeping away Virgil and Darlene Gumersheimer's home.
It had never been flooded. It was built in 1903, and the house had never been wet.
They lost everything except the will to recover.
The river is about a half a mile that way.
10 years after the flood, they showed us their new home, built a mile from the old one, and now not in the floodplain.
We're farming all the same land that we were before, except just a few acres that we never got back in shape again where the levee broke. We've pretty well put everything back to what we needed. I think I'd say we're fully recovered.
Recovered and able to joke about their loss.
No, we're really glad to get out of that old home.
The Gumersheimers are now in their 80s, in the same home, and still farming the same land. And they tell us they're doing great. Kristen Cornett, News 4.
The Great Flood of '93, 30 years later, sponsored by John Beal Roofing.
What can we do for you?
Wake up with the morning team that always puts you first.
Because you deserve to be first.
First alert weather to plan your day.
First alert traffic to plan your drive.
And first to know about news that impacts you and your family.
Just add coffee.
We'll take care of everything else.
Cheers. Wake up with News 4 this morning.
Putting you first every morning.
30 years after the flood, one of the most common questions we hear is, could this happen again? Well, experts from the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers believe it's not likely.
What worried me after the '93 flood was, if we get another big one, will these systems hold up? Well, what I feel today, you know, much later, 30 years later, is these systems are so much better. So that's the lesson, is there's always a bigger flood out there, and you gotta stay vigilant.
The flood of '93 was historic for its height, breadth, and overwhelming power. But as you have seen, it will also be remembered for the armies of volunteers who poured in like a flood, rushing to help. KMOV celebrated that support by producing a flood relief video, Neighbor to Neighbor. The song, written and performed by Randy Mayfield, who lives today in West County, and joined by late KMOV anchor Mary Phelan. We leave you now with just a bit of that tribute. And if you are one of the thousands who helped, let us say again, thank you for stepping in. And thank you for joining us tonight.
As you watch all your hopes and your dreams drift away, it's hard to hold back the emotion and pain. But know that tomorrow will bring a new day. And together we'll work to start over again. Neighbor to neighbor, friend to friend. Let's reach out and lend a helping hand. Neighbor to neighbor, friend to friend. Let's reach out and lend a helping hand.